This could be a relatively quick video. I've just heard the news that Rubin Carter, he was a famous middleweight contender in the 1960s, boxing contender. He's just passed away. Now he became famous because of a miscarriage of justice. He served years in prison for a crime he did not commit, and it was it was turned into a film starring Denzel Washington called The Hurricane. Good film if you ever get a chance to see it. So the sad news is that Rubin Carter has just passed away at 76. I don't generally make videos when someone has passed away, but in this case I wanted to discuss a wider topic a little bit, which is miscarriage of justice. To me, that is one of the worst things that can happen to anyone, is to be jailed for something that you haven't done, or jailed under an unjust law. The film documents those who tried to clear his name and the sort of experience he went through on the inside, that sort of thing. Now Rubin Carter is a famous example, but there's many other people who aren't as famous who have served time for things they didn't do. Rubin Carter made something out of this experience in the sense that he spent years, I believe he was the CEO of something called the Innocence Project, or I'm not sure if exactly that's the name, but he was in charge of a charity that campaigned for people around the world who were thought to be imprisoned on a miscarriage of justice. One of the worst examples of all was a recent case I documented, Awao Hakimoto, a Japanese man who served 49 years, much longer than Rubin Carter, for a crime he didn't commit, or at least is likely he didn't commit because the evidence wasn't presented at the time. You know, when we talk about justice, it is absolutely critical that if someone is sentenced either for a long custodial sentence or the death penalty, the evidence must be solid. It must be, because anything else is a perversion of justice. And actually, it's not just a problem for the person who's being falsely imprisoned. It actually lets down the victim's family as well, because they're being denied justice of the real perpetrator being punished for that crime. So for me it's a tragic thing, and that's why legal systems, I don't care which country it is, have to be absolutely thorough, because a miscarriage of justice is truly one of the worst things I can think of. Not only are you serving a prison sentence for something that you haven't done, but your name is blackened. You are seen as the murderer, as the rapist, as the whatever the crime is, and it's terrible. There have been a few cases in the United Kingdom, and I suspect there'll be cases all over the world. As I've said before, there's no legal system in the world that is perfect. However, I do believe that some are more corrupt than others. I'm conservative on crime. I believe that people who commit crime should face tough penalties. But I'm also someone who believes staunchly in innocent until proven guilty. Even if someone has a reputation for being violent or whatever, it has to be a situation where the evidence is rock solid. So that's why I'm a little bit wary of the Pistorius Trial. Some of the things the prosecution are using, for example, he rowed with his girlfriend. Well, name one relationship where people don't have a row. That seems to be really flimsy, sort of. And they're talking about how he had firearms and that sort of thing. Of course, they have to work with the material they have, I understand that, but I do question some of the techniques the prosecution is using. For example, I think it was extremely tasteless to show a photograph of Reva Steenkamp whilst the family was watching. You know, I think the job of the prosecutor is to prosecute, and I do think some of these people are hell-bent on getting their own way. Never mind about the truth, they're just hell-bent on getting their own way. I don't know if Oscar Pistorius is guilty or not. I just don't know. I wasn't there. But it does trouble me that there's a lot of people coming up statements like, oh, he's guilty as hell, I hope he gets time, etc. People who seem to have this cast iron notion in their head that he is guilty. They weren't there. How do they know he's guilty? I'm not saying the man's innocent. I am not saying that I think he's innocent. I genuinely don't know either way. But I think there's a risk here that because this trial is being sensationalized so much, that could prejudice the outcome either way. Either it will turn him into a saint who's being sort of like it's being done, because if people perceive that the trial is damaging his case, then that will martyrize him, and then for all we know he could be guilty, then a guilty man will escape justice. On the other hand, an innocent man could be vilified by the media coverage, you know, because these sort of high profile trials, inevitably it has an influence on people's thinking in a way that a trial that isn't televised wouldn't have, because the general public wouldn't know. I don't accept this argument that there's a public need to know, because we're talking here about an individual who's been murdered in a domestic situation. Clearly Oscar Pistorius is not a threat to anyone else in South Africa. Whatever happened in this case, there's clearly no... I don't see a public interest argument here, I really don't, other than the fact that both the victim and the person who pulled the trigger are celebrities. So it's just tabloid fodder, and it makes me uncomfortable that it's being turned into a sort of circus. These are people's lives we're talking about. It makes me very uncomfortable. It's one thing I do like about the British justice system, and believe me, there's a lot of things I don't like. One thing I do like is the fact that our court cases are not televised. In my opinion, that is a very good thing. I would hate a situation where it became Americanized and we had these televised court proceedings. To me, that turns... I'm not saying they turn it into entertainment, but it does sensationalize something that, in my opinion, needs absolute objectivity. If something is sensationalized in that way, I think objectivity starts to be damaged. I really do. And it does trouble me that so many people automatically assume someone is guilty when they weren't there and they don't know the facts. And in parts of the world like China, whereby there's a presumption of guilt, there is defense lawyers, but there's also a presumption of guilt, especially in cases that are going up against the state, or, you know, the so-called petty criminals. There's definitely a disadvantage there. In other justice systems around the world, Japan for example, if someone's on death row, they're executed without the relatives even knowing, which I've never understood that. I don't understand what purpose that serves. It just seems unnecessarily cruel to me, because whatever you think of the killers themselves, it doesn't mean that their family should be punished. It's not the family that has committed the crime. So there's a lot of flaws in every legal system in the world, but miscarriage of justice is something for me that's certainly, I think the Japanese system should be reformed, given the case of Mr. Hakamoto. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing his name. I'm thinking sort of spontaneously in this video. So sad news about Rubin Carter, but I really hope his experience can make people open-minded about this subject, and the absolute necessity for legal systems to be thorough, comprehensive and just. That means the guilty should face punishment, but it must be an absolute solid evidence. And definitely not, I think, by the way, one final point I would make, I think the police should be forced to hand over evidence, and any police force that withholds evidence should face prosecution. We have had situations in the United Kingdom of miscarriages of justice, and that's been a situation whereby the police have withheld evidence. That is shameful. Whatever their motivation is, it is shameful. They have no right to interfere with the legal process, especially people who are meant to be law enforcers. Now, whatever you think of the person in the dock, that is an abomination, that the police would withhold evidence, and we have had cases where that has happened. I think the police should be forced to hand over evidence, legally forced. And they can whinge about it as much as they want, but in the end of the day, if any evidence is withheld, that automatically means that the trial cannot be completely fair. That just goes without saying. And this is from someone who is conservative on crime. I believe criminals should be harshly punished in proportion to the crime they've committed, but it has to be based on absolute guilt. Okay? Thanks for watching.